Hi, I'm Camille Hunt, and I will walk you through the Lost Tools of Writing, Level 1. We will start with Essay 1, Invention, and you can see that we're going back a little farther than than the book goes. The book talks about the Annie, but we're going to talk also about the steps that we take to get to the Annie. So that's why this title is like this. I hope you've seen Andrew's presentation of the problems of writing. He talks about all the problems we have when we write and how they fall into 3 categories. And those 3 categories are the first 3 canons of rhetoric. Lost Tools is a rhetoric curriculum, which is classical rhetoric, which will explain the difference between Lost Tools and some other writing programs. And we start with the 3 canons: the invention, arrangement, and elocution. And those are the ones that we teach in Lost Tools of Writing. There are also 2 more canons in classical rhetoric: memory and delivery. So if you've written this as a speech, you memorize and deliver it. We don't get to the speech part, but we have all the writing parts that will give you the elements of a speech. And we will start with invention. And I'd like to say too, because this is classical rhetoric, it'll be a little different from other writing programs. It'll contain those things, but it also has more. So we go beyond that. And this is a 2,000-year-old tradition, 2,500 years old probably. And it arose because of real life and the things that we need to do in real life. So this is about real life. It's a preparation for that. It's not a school subject. And we are teaching skills that help us to think, to decide, and then how to organize and express ourselves in writing. And that's why writing is included in this, but it goes way beyond writing. And I love it. I love Lost Tools, and I hope that I can show you the benefits of it. And I want you to know too that as we go, if you have questions, you always have a place to get answers. We have live people. I don't know if they're standing by, but we have 2 groups. We have an IO group that used to be a Yahoo group, and it's called LTW Mentor. And we have a Facebook group that's called the Lost Tools of Writing Mentor. So if you go to one of those places, IO groups or Facebook, then you can find our forum on one of those. And we have teachers from our teacher training program that are answering questions there. They're in the 3-year apprenticeship program being trained by Cersei, or they have been completed it and been out of it for a long time. A lot of those people are answering questions for you there. I answer questions too in the IO group. And I'll give you some links and a lot more resources when we get to the end of this slide. But I just want you to know that anytime you get stuck on something, you can stop the video and go ask somebody a question. So I hope that that's sounds good to you. We are glad that you're joining us on this adventure and grace. And so let's start here. First question is, and you can start by asking your students this: have we made any decisions this morning? I bet we have. I decided what to have for breakfast, and I decided whether to make more coffee. So if we've made decisions, then we're prepared to move on with this lesson and to be able to understand the next steps. Here's the next question, though. When do we wonder about what people should do? I think that we do that almost incessantly. We wonder all the time what people should do. We almost never stop thinking about that. We wonder, we watch a movie, we're telling somebody, don't do it. Or tell her, say something. So we always have opinions about what someone should do. And we do this in our own lives too. We say, should I have done that? Should I have said that? Should I have responded? Should I go back and add more? So we're asking these questions all the time. And that's why Lost Tools essays always start with a question like this, because we are giving our students a normative education. We want them to think about what people ought to be doing. And they'll learn to think about that for themselves as they move through this curriculum. And so the question is, how do we make decisions about what we should do? Sometimes we have good ways. Sometimes we need more help. Another question is, how can we help our children to become wise, to know what's right and wrong? And I just mentioned a bit of that. How do we teach our children also how to love their neighbors? They have to know what's right and they have to feel what's right to be able to love their neighbors. So I propose that practicing these lessons in the Lost Tools of Writing will help cultivate these skills in our children, help them to think, to listen, and to love their neighbors and to become wise. This is what it can do when we're willing and when we work. So for the first example of this, as we work through all of these videos, we're going to use 2 stories as examples to write all the examples from. And because this is a preparation for real life, we are practicing with real lives, or pretend real lives in this case, because you don't know my next door neighbor. I don't know your next door neighbor. We could practice with them, but we don't know them all. We don't all know them. And maybe that's not nice, I'm not sure. But we can take these characters from literature. We will lift a character out of literature in order to practice classical rhetoric. So we start by reading some good stories. And the one we're going to start with today is The Emperor's New Suit. And I'm going to use the version, just to keep us all on the same page here, I'm going to use the version from Tales of Wonder, Volume 2. And the title, I've always heard The Emperor's New Clothes, but this is called The Emperor's New Suit. And just to make sure that we are together as we think about the story, I'm going to read the story to you. I debated about whether to do this. So if you don't want to hear it, just fast forward until you see the next slide pop up. And if you don't have the book, then you can listen to it here. Also, there's a website called, it's hca.gilead, Gilead, that has a pretty close copy of this story. But here it is, the tale. And if you'd like to follow, it's in Tales of Wonder, Volume 2 on page 30. It starts on page 39. Many, many years ago lived an emperor who thought so much of new clothes that he spent all his money in order to obtain them. His only ambition was to be always well dressed. He did not care for his soldiers, and the theater did not much amuse him. The only thing, in fact, he thought anything of was to drive out and show a new suit of clothes. He had a coat for every hour of the day, and as one would say of a king, he is in his cabinet, so one could say of him, the emperor is in his dressing room. The great city where he resided was very gay. Every day, many strangers from all parts of the globe arrived. One day, 2 swindlers came to this city. They made people believe that they were weavers and declared they could manufacture the finest cloth to be imagined. Their colors and patterns, they said, were not only exceptionally beautiful, but the clothes made of their material possessed the wonderful quality of being invisible to any man who was unfit for his office or unpardonably stupid. That must be wonderful cloth, thought the emperor. If I were to be dressed in a suit made of this cloth, I should be able to find out which men in my empire were unfit for their places, and I could distinguish the clever from the stupid. I must have this cloth woven for me without delay. And he gave a large sum of money to the swindlers in advance that they should set to work without any loss of time. They set up 2 looms and pretended to be very hard at work, but they did nothing whatever on their looms. They asked for the finest silk and the most precious gold cloth. All they got, they did away with, and worked at the empty looms till late at night. I should very much like to know how they are getting on with the cloth, thought the emperor, but he felt rather uneasy when he remembered that he who was not fit for his office could not see it. Personally, he was of the opinion that he had nothing to fear, yet he thought it advisable to send somebody else first to see how matters stood. Everybody in the town knew what a remarkable quality the stuff possessed, and all were anxious to see how bad or stupid their neighbors were. I shall send my honest old minister to the weavers, thought the emperor. He can judge best how the stuff looks, for he is intelligent, and nobody understands his office better than he. The good old minister went into the room where the swindlers sat before the empty looms. Heaven preserve us, he thought, and opened his eyes wide. I cannot see anything at all. But he did not say so. Both swindlers requested him to come near and asked him if he did not admire the exquisite pattern and the beautiful colors, pointing to the empty looms. The poor old minister tried his very best, but he could see nothing, for there was nothing to be seen. Oh dear, he thought, can I be so stupid? I should never have thought so, and nobody must know it. Is it possible that I am not fit for my office? No, I cannot say that I was unable to see the cloth. Now, have you got nothing to say? Said one of the swindlers while he pretended to be busily weaving. Oh, it is very pretty, exceedingly beautiful, replied the old minister, looking through his glasses. What a beautiful pattern, what brilliant colors. I shall tell the emperor that I like the cloth very much. We are pleased to hear that, said the two weavers, and described to him the colors and explained the curious pattern. The old minister listened attentively that he might relate to the emperor what they said, and so he did. Now the swindlers asked for more money, silk, and gold cloth, which they required for weaving. They kept everything for themselves, and not a thread came near the loom. But they continued, as hitherto, to work at the empty looms. Soon afterwards, the emperor sent another honest courtier to the weavers to ask how they were getting on, and if the cloth was nearly finished. Like the old minister, he looked and looked, but could see nothing, as there was nothing to be seen. Is it not a beautiful piece of cloth? Asked the two swindlers, showing and explaining the magnificent pattern, which, however, did not exist. I am not stupid, said the man. It is therefore my good appointment for which I am not fit. It is very strange, but I must not let anyone know it. And he praised the cloth, which he did not see, and expressed his joy at the beautiful colors and the fine pattern. It is very excellent, he said to the emperor. Everybody in the whole town talked about the precious cloth. At last, the emperor wished to see it himself while it was still on the loom. With a number of courtiers, including the two who had already been there, he went to the two clever swindlers who now worked as hard as they could, but without using any thread. Is it not magnificent? Said the two old statesmen who had been there before. Your Majesty must admire the colors and the pattern. And then they pointed to the empty looms, for they imagined the others could see the cloth. What is this? Thought the emperor. I do not see anything at all. That is terrible. Am I stupid? Am I unfit to be emperor? That would indeed be the most dreadful thing that could happen to me. Really, he said, turning to the weavers, your cloth has our most gracious approval. And nodding contentedly, he looked at the empty loom, for he did not like to say that he saw nothing. All his attendants who were with him looked, and although they could not see anything more than the others, they said, like the emperor, it is very beautiful. And all advised him to wear the new magnificent clothes at a great procession which was soon to take place. It is magnificent, beautiful, excellent, one heard them say. Everybody seemed to be delighted, and the emperor appointed the two swindlers imperial court weavers. The whole night previous to the day on which the procession was to take place, the swindlers pretended to work and burned more than 16 candles. People should see that they were busy to finish the emperor's new suit. They pretended to take the cloth from the loom and worked about in the air with big scissors and sewed with needles without thread, and said at last, "The emperor's new suit is ready now." The emperor and all his barons then came into the hall. The swindlers held up their arms as if they had something in their hands and said, "These are the trousers, this is the coat, and here is the cloak," and so on. They are all as light as cobweb, and one must feel as if one had nothing at all upon the body, but that is just the beauty of them. Indeed, said all the courtiers, but they could not see anything because there was nothing to be seen. Does it please your Majesty now to graciously undress, said the swindlers, that we may assist your Majesty in putting on the new suit before the large looking glass? The emperor undressed, and the swindlers pretended to put the new suit upon him, one piece after the other. And the emperor looked at himself in the glass from every side. How well they look! How well they fit! Said all. What a beautiful pattern! What fine colors! That is a magnificent suit of clothes. The master of the ceremonies announced that the bearers of the canopy, which was to be carried in the procession, were ready. I am ready, said the emperor. Does not my new suit Does not my suit fit me marvelously? Then he turned once more to the looking-glass, that people should think he admired his garments. The chamberlains who were to carry the train stretched their hands to the ground as if they lifted up a train and pretended to hold something in their hands. They did not like people to know that they could not see anything. The emperor marched in the procession under the beautiful canopy, and all who saw him in the street and out of the windows exclaimed, "Indeed, the emperor's new suit is incomparable. What a long train he has! How well it fits him!" Nobody wished to let others know he saw nothing, for then he would have been unfit for his office or too stupid. Never emperor's clothes were more admired. "But he has nothing on at all," said a little child at last. "Good heavens, listen to the voice of an innocent child," said the father, and one whispered to the other what the child had said. "But he has nothing on at all," cried at last the whole people. That made a deep impression on the emperor, for it seemed to him that they were right. But he thought to himself, "Now I must bear up to the end." And the chamberlains walked with still greater dignity, as if they carried the train, which did not exist. All right. So our first step in writing is to do some reading. So now we have a story under our belts and we're ready for the next step. Next, you might ask a child to, if you're reading this with a group of people or with one child, if you read it out loud, or if he reads it, you might ask him to tell the story back to you first. But then we ask, who's in the story? The emperor was one of the characters. The weavers were characters in the story. The emperor's good old minister, who went the first time, people watching the parade, and the little boy. So we just have a list of characters from the story. The next step is to add some actions to the character list. What did those people do? The emperor loved his clothing. He often paraded in it. He hired new weavers. He wore the new suit in his parade. And he kept going after he realized his mistake. I didn't write that on the board, but the weavers did these things. They asked for gold and silk. They said their fabric could be seen only by the wise, or the smart, I guess, those fit for their jobs. They worked on looms. They dressed the emperor for the parade. They told the emperor he looked good. The emperor's good old minister, he checked the work's progress, and he said the suit looked good. People in the crowd, they watched the parade. They said the emperor's clothes were great, magnificent. The little boy, he watched the parade, or I guess it says little child. I think the other story said a boy. Anyway, he watched the parade. He said the emperor had nothing on at all. So now we have a character action list. And you can even use this with second graders or 5-year-olds. You can read a story and make a list of who was in it and then list of their actions. And this is good preparation for high school writing. It's also good. It's a good review of the story. It helps us remember the story just to make this list. So you don't have to write an essay. You can read a lot of stories and stop here with this step. But if we want to write, we'll look at this character action list and select one character action pair. I selected the emperor, and whether the emperor, and I was wondering if he should have worn his new suit in the parade. Looked like he had some doubts. So we take 2 steps. We are wondering, should the emperor have paraded in his new suit? And then step 2 is convert our should question. Remember, we're always asking what people should have done. And we're going to convert our should question to an issue. Whether the emperor should have paraded in his new suit. So we go from a question with a capital letter and a question mark to this issue, which is just a clause, a dependent clause. So it doesn't have a capital letter or any end marks. The whole sentence would be, we are wondering whether the emperor should have paraded in his new suit. But you see that subject's not there. So this is how we write it. So when we turn the question into an issue, 2 things happen. First of all, we don't have an immediate yes or no answer like we do when we say, should he have done it? The answer is, yep, or the answer is nope. And we want to think about it more. So we not only have the possibility, if we change this into an issue, the question to an issue, we not only have the possibility of thinking about it and of maybe thinking on both sides, it almost compels us. This framing the issue this way almost compels us to think on both sides of the issue. We talked about how we make decisions. We usually think of pros and cons, people say, or advantages, disadvantages. And so this whether statement, this issue, helps us to be able to do that. So we're going to set up a chart to put our answers in. We're going to put our thoughts in this. This is the bucket that holds our answers. And we're going to put the affirmatives, like I said, some reasons that he did it, some negatives, some reasons why maybe he shouldn't have done it. And then we have a third column called the interesting column. So this is more information or just another inventory, just things that we know about the story, or things we know about things that are in the story. So that's why this chart is affirmative, negative, interesting, or for short, ANI, and even shorter is Annie, like the girl's name. So let's look at these reasons. Why should he have paraded in the new suit? You may not be able to think of any reasons he should have done that. You may say there is not one good reason he should have done it, but there are reasons he did it. And so we need to understand that side of the issue also. So why did he do that? He wanted to. He was proud of his clothes. He believed that he looked good. He trusted the suit makers, the weavers. His minister said this clothes looked good. Everyone else in the palace said the clothes looked good. The clothes were ready. He wanted the crowds to admire him. He loved his clothes more than anything. His only ambition was being well dressed. So those are all the reasons he did wear his suit in the parade, or should have worn it. We probably come into this with an inclination that we're leaning one way or the other. But when we fill out this Annie and we go through our thinking and we put the thoughts into words, on written words, then we can see our thinking much more clearly. And when I have to make a decision about something, I do this. And when I write down things, then I understand my reasons better. I may have sort of a gut instinct, but when I get things on paper, then it's much more clear. So what are the reasons? So we have a hypothesis, but we need to test it. And the Annie is what allows us to test it. So it's okay to come in, if your students come in inclined to choose one side or the other, but they need to understand that they go through this process in order to be sure about the side that they choose, because we don't want to make a decision and then think about it. That gets us into trouble. So negative column, why he should not have paraded in the new suit. He couldn't see the clothes. He was afraid of looking bad. Fear is not good. Base decisions on. Could have put that on the next line. He was naked. He was probably afraid of being naked. And at some level, he was probably in public, and he was probably aware of his exposure. No one likes to be naked in public. He should have trusted his gut. It was time at the parade, time to admit the truth. And he shouldn't have done it because of his pride. He had too much pride to get himself out of a bad situation. And he went from being dressed to being naked. And maybe you've noticed what's next to it. Adam went from being naked to being dressed. They both want to know things. We don't have to go deep with these. We're going to just write what's shallow, whatever we think on the top of our heads. But sometimes we will fall in deep. He wanted to know about people. He wanted to know who was good and who was evil, which is similar to Adam's question. And Adam went to needing clothes, and he started out needing them and having them, but then the emperor ended up being naked. Anyway, sorry. That's an aside. These things are fun to think about, but we don't have to try to come up with deep reasons like that. And we don't want to ask our 12-year-olds to have this kind of insight, but it might happen. It eventually will happen. And that's why these lessons are delightful to our students. God made us to think, and when we understand, we feel his pleasure. But in the meantime, We just have this bucket with 3 columns, and we're going to put into it whatever we think of. So interesting. This doesn't really argue one side or the other. The suit makers were from another city. Remember, they were in a big city, a crossroads. People were happy there. They came from all kinds of places. It was exciting. So these people were from out of town. So the suit makers were not his subjects. The suit makers or the weavers asked for gold. The weavers asked for silk. And you notice I did not put an and in there. I made that 2 separate lines. It's good to keep those separate. Keep each item apart from the others. Silk is used to make fine clothing. And as I was writing this, I went off on my silk tangent, which is fine. Silk threads are spun by silkworms. Silk was first made in China. People raise silkworms now. And this cloth was lighter than silk. So this might end up going back into the affirmative column, or maybe the negative column. These things will help us just keep thinking, putting things in the interesting column, and they might end up being used later. But even if they're not, they're still relevant to the story. And they could end up being relevant to our reasons in our writing, even though we may not have seen yet how that could happen. Okay, number 2. So that's one example. We just really quickly, we had the story, the character action list. We picked one and turned it into an issue. And then we wrote 10 items in each column of the affirmative, negative, interesting. So now we filled out an Annie. So just to make sure we get the idea, we're going to do it one more time. And this time we're going to use the story, The Ugly Duckling. This one's a little bit longer, but you can take a break anytime you want because you can pause your recording. It was lovely summer weather in the country. This is on page 81 of Tales of Wonder 2, volume 2, same book. And this is also available online on a website called East of the Web. They have some good short stories, fairy tales for children. I think they also have a non-children's section, so I want to watch that. Fix my mic. All right. It was lovely summer weather in the country. And the golden corn, the green oats, and the haystacks piled up in the meadows looked beautiful. The stork, walking about on his long red legs, chattered in the Egyptian language, which he had learnt from his mother. The cornfields and meadows were surrounded by large forests, in the midst of which were deep pools. It was indeed delightful to walk about in the country. In a sunny spot stood a pleasant old farmhouse close by a deep river. And from the house down to the waterside grew great burdock leaves, so high that under the tallest of them a little child could stand upright. The spot was as wild as the center of a thick wood. In this snug retreat sat a duck on her nest, watching for her young brood to hatch. She was beginning to get tired of her task, for the little ones were a long time coming out of their shells, and she seldom had any visitors. The other ducks liked much better to swim about in the river than to climb the slippery banks and sit under a burdock leaf to have a gossip with her. At length, one shell cracked, and then another, and from each egg came a living creature that lifted its head and cried, "Peep, peep." "Quack, quack," said the mother, and then they all quacked as well as they could and looked about them on every side at the large green leaves. Their mother allowed them to look as much as they liked because green is good for the eyes. "How large the world is," said the young ducks when they found how much more room they now had than while they were inside the eggshell. "Do you imagine this is the whole world?" asked the mother. "Wait till you have seen the garden. It stretches far beyond that to the parson's field, but I have never ventured to such a distance. Are you all out?" she continued, rising. "No, I declare the largest egg lies there still. I wonder how long this is to last. I am quite tired of it." And she seated herself again on the nest. "Well, how are you getting on?" asked an old duck who paid her a visit. "One egg is not hatched yet," said the duck. "It will not break. But just look at all the others. Are they not the prettiest little ducklings you ever saw? They are the image of their father, who is so unkind he never comes to see." "Let me see the egg that will not break," said the duck. I have no doubt it is a turkey's egg. I was persuaded to hatch some once, and after all my care and trouble with the young ones, they were afraid of the water. I quacked and clucked, but all to no purpose. I could not get them to venture in. Let me look at the egg. Yes, that is a turkey's egg. Take my advice. Leave it where it is and teach the other children to swim. I think I will sit on it a little while longer, said the duck. As I have sat so long already, a few days will be nothing. Please yourself, said the old duck, and she went away. At last the large egg broke, and a young one crept forth, crying, "Peep, peep." It was very large and ugly. The duck stared at it and exclaimed, "It's very large and not at all like the others. I wonder if it really is a turkey. We shall soon find it out, however, when we go to the water. It must go in if I have to push it myself." On the next day, the weather was delightful, and the sun shone brightly on the green burdock leaves. So the mother duck took her young brood down to the water and jumped in with a splash. "Quack, quack," cried she. And one after another, the little ducklings jumped in. The water closed over their heads, but they came up again in an instant and swam about quite prettily, with their legs paddling under them as easily as possible. And the young duckling was also in the water, swimming with them. "Oh," said the mother, "that is not a turkey. How well he uses his legs, and how upright he holds himself. He is my own child, and he is not so very ugly after all, if you look at him properly. Quack, quack. Come with me now. I will take you into grand society and introduce you to the farmyard, but you must keep close to me or you may be trodden upon, and above all, beware of the cat." When they reached the farmyard, there was a great disturbance. 2 families were fighting for an eel's head, which, after all, was carried off by the cat. "See, children, that is the way of the world," said the mother duck, whetting her beak, for she would have liked the eel's head herself. "Come now, use your legs, and let me see how well you can behave. You must bow your heads prettily to that old duck yonder. She is the highest born of them all, and has Spanish blood. Therefore she is well off. Don't you see she has a red flag tied to her leg, which is something very grand and a great honor for a duck. It shows that everyone is anxious not to lose her, as she can be recognized both by man and beast. Come now, don't turn your toes. A well-bred duckling spreads his feet wide apart, just like his father and mother, in this way. Now bend your neck and say quack." Ducklings did as they were bid, but the other ducks stared and said, "Look, here comes another brood, as if there were not enough of us already. And what a queer-looking object one of them is. We don't want him here." And then one flew out and bit him in the neck. "Let him alone," said the mother. "He's not doing any harm." "Yes, but he is so big and ugly," said the spiteful duck, "and therefore he must be turned out." "The others are very pretty children," said the old duck with the rag on her leg. "All but that one. I wish his mother could improve him a little." "That is impossible, your grace," replied the mother. "He is not pretty, but he has a very good disposition and swims as well or even better than the others. I think he will grow up pretty and perhaps be smaller. He has remained too long in the egg, and therefore his figure is not properly formed." And then she stroked his neck and smoothed the feathers, saying, "It is a drake, and therefore not of so much consequence. I think he will grow up strong and able to take care of himself." "The other ducklings are graceful enough," said the old duck. "Now make yourself at home, and if you can find an eel's head, you can bring it to me." And so they made themselves comfortable. But the poor duckling, who had crept out of his shell last of all, and looked so ugly, was bitten and pushed and made fun of, not only by the ducks, but by all the poultry. "He is too big," they all said, and the turkey cock, who had been born into the world with spurs and fancied himself really an emperor, puffed himself out like a vessel in full sail and flew at the duckling and became quite red in the head with passion, so that the poor little thing did not know where to go and was quite miserable because he was so ugly and laughed at by the whole farmyard. So it went on from day to day till it got worse and worse. The poor duckling was driven about by everyone. Even his brothers and sisters were unkind to him and would say, "Ah, you ugly creature, I wish the cat would get you." And his mother said she wished he had never been born. The ducks pecked him, the chickens beat him, and the girl who fed the poultry kicked him with her feet, so that at last he ran away, frightening the little birds in the hedge as he flew over the palings. "They are afraid of me because I'm ugly," he said. So he closed his eyes and flew still farther until he came out on a large moor inhabited by wild ducks. Here he remained the whole night, feeling very tired and sorrowful. In the morning, when the wild ducks rose in the air, they stared at their new comrade. "What sort of duck are you?" they all said, coming round him. He bowed to them and was as polite as he could be, but he did not reply to their question. "You are exceedingly ugly," said the wild ducks, "but that will not matter if you do not want to marry one of our family." Poor thing, he had no thoughts of marriage. All he wanted was permission to lie among the rushes and drink some water on the moor. After he had been on the moor 2 days, there came 2 wild geese, or rather goslings, for they had not been out of the egg long, and they were very saucy. "Listen, friend," said one of them to the duckling, "you are so ugly that we like you very well. Will you go with us and become a bird of passage? Not far from here there's another moor, in which there are some pretty wild geese, all unmarried. It is a chance for you to get a wife. You may be lucky, ugly as you are." Pop, pop sounded in the air, and the 2 wild geese fell dead among the rushes, and the water was tinged with blood. Pop, pop echoed far and wide in the distance, and whole flocks of wild geese rose up from the rushes. The sound continued from every direction, for the sportsmen surrounded the moor, and some were even seated on branches of trees overlooking the rushes. The blue smoke from the guns rose like clouds over the dark trees as it floated away across the water. A number of sporting dogs bounded in among the rushes, which bent beneath them wherever they went. How they terrified the poor duckling! He turned away his head to hide it under his wing, and at the same moment a large, terrible dog passed quite near him. His jaws were open, his tongue hung from his mouth, and his eyes glared fearfully. He thrust his nose close to the duckling, showing his sharp teeth, and then splash, splash, he went into the water without touching him. "Oh," sighed the duckling, "how thankful I am for being so ugly. Even a dog will not bite me." And so he lay quite still, while the shot rattled through the rushes and gun after gun was fired over him. It was late in the day before all became quiet, but even then the poor young thing did not dare move. He waited quietly for several hours, and then, after looking carefully around him, hastened away from the moor as fast as he could. He ran over field and meadow till a storm arose, and he could hardly struggle against it. Towards evening, he reached a poor little cottage that seemed ready to fall, and only remained standing because it could not decide on which side to fall first. The storm continued so violent that the duckling could go no farther. He sat down by the cottage, and then he noticed that the door was not quite closed in consequence of one of the hinges having given way. There was therefore a narrow opening near the bottom, large enough for him to slip through, which he did very quietly, and got a shelter for the night. A woman, a tomcat, and a hen lived in this cottage. The tomcat, whom the mistress called "my little son," was a great favorite. He could raise his back and purr. He could even throw out sparks from his fur if it were stroked the wrong way. The hen had very short legs, so she was called Chicky Short Legs. She laid good eggs, and her mistress loved her as if she had been her own child. In the morning, the strange visitor was discovered, and the tomcat began to purr and the hen to cluck. "What is that noise about?" said the old woman, looking round the room, but her sight was not very good. Therefore, when she saw the duckling, she thought it must be a fat duck that had strayed from home. "Oh, what a prize!" she exclaimed. "I hope it is not a drake, for then I shall have some duck's eggs. I must wait and see." So the duckling was allowed to remain on trial for 3 weeks, but there were no eggs. Now the tomcat was master of the house, and the hen was mistress, and they always said, "We and the world," for they believed themselves to be half the world, and the better half too. The duckling thought that others might hold a different opinion on the subject, but the hen would not listen to such doubts. "Can you lay eggs?" she asked. "No." "Then have the goodness to hold your tongue." "Can you raise your back or purr or throw out sparks?" said the tomcat. "No." "Then you have no right to express an opinion when sensible people are speaking." So the duckling sat in a corner, feeling very low-spirited, till the sunshine and the fresh air came into the room through the open door, and then he began to feel such a great longing for a swim on the water that he could not help telling the hen. "What an absurd idea," said the hen. "You have nothing else to do, therefore you have foolish fancies. If you could purr or lay eggs, they would pass away." "But it is so delightful to swim about on the water," said the duckling, and so refreshing to feel it close over your head while you dive down to the bottom. Delightful indeed, said the hen. Why, you must be crazy. Ask the cat. He's the cleverest animal I know. Ask him how he would like to swim about on the water or to dive under it, for I will not speak of my own opinion. Ask our mistress, the old woman. There is no one in the world more clever than she is. Do you think she would like to swim or to let the water close over her head? You don't understand me, said the duckling. We don't understand you? Who can understand you, I wonder? Do you consider yourself more clever than the cat or the old woman? I will say nothing of myself. Don't imagine such nonsense, child, and thank your good fortune that you have been received here. Are you not in a warm room and in society from which you may learn something? But you are a chatterer, and your company is not very agreeable. Believe me, I speak only for your good. I may tell you unpleasant truths, but that is a proof of my friendship. I advise you, therefore, to lay eggs and learn to purr as quickly as possible. I believe I must go out into the world again, said the duckling. Yes, do, said the hen. So the duckling left the cottage and soon found water on which it could swim and dive, but was avoided by all other animals because of its ugly appearance. Autumn came, and the leaves in the forest turned to orange and gold. Then, as winter approached, the wind caught them as they fell and whirled them in the cold air. The clouds, heavy with hail and snowflakes, hung low in the sky, and the raven stood on the ferns crying, croak, croak, made one shiver with cold to look at him. All this was very sad for the poor little duckling. One evening, just as the sun set amid radiant clouds, there came a large flock of beautiful birds out of the bushes. The duckling had never seen any like them before. They were swans, and they curved their graceful necks while their soft plumage shone with dazzling whiteness. They uttered a singular cry as they spread their glorious wings and flew away from those cold regions to warmer countries across the sea. As they mounted higher and higher in the air, the ugly little duckling felt quite a strange sensation as he watched them. He whirled himself in the water like a wheel, stretched out his neck towards them, and uttered a cry so strange that it frightened him. Could he ever forget those beautiful, happy birds? And when at last they were out of his sight, he dived under the water and rose again almost beside himself with excitement. He knew not the names of these birds nor where they had flown, but he felt towards them as he had never felt for any other bird in the world. He was not envious of these beautiful creatures, but wished to be as lovely as they. Poor ugly creature, how gladly he would have lived even with the ducks if they had they only given him encouragement. The winter grew colder and colder. He was obliged to swim about on the water to keep it from freezing, but every night the space on which he swam became smaller and smaller. At length it froze so hard that the ice in the water crackled as he moved, and the duckling had to paddle with his legs as well as he could to keep the space from closing up. He became exhausted at last and lay still and helpless, frozen fast in the ice. Early in the morning, a peasant who was passing by saw what had happened. He broke the ice in pieces with his wooden shoe and carried the duckling home to his wife. The warmth revived the poor little creature. But when the children wanted to play with him, the duckling thought they would do him some harm, so he started up in terror, fluttered into the milk pan, and splashed the milk about the room. Then the woman clapped her hands, which frightened him still more. He flew first into the butter cask, then into the meal tub, and out again. What a condition he was in! The woman screamed and struck at him with the tongs. The children laughed and screamed and tumbled over each other in their efforts to catch him. But luckily, he escaped. The door stood open. The poor creature could just manage to slip out among the bushes and lie down quite exhausted in the newly fallen snow. It would be very sad were I to relate all the misery and privations which the poor little duckling endured during the hard winter. But when it had passed, he found himself lying one morning in a moor amidst the rushes. He felt the warm sun shining and heard the lark singing and saw that all around was beautiful spring. Then the young bird felt that his wings were strong as he flapped them against his sides and rose high into the air. They bore him onwards until he found himself in a large garden And before he knew well how it had happened, the apple trees were in full blossom, and the fragrant elders bent their long green branches down to the stream which wound round a smooth lawn. Everything looked beautiful in the freshness of early spring. From a thicket close by came 3 beautiful white swans, rustling their feathers and swimming lightly over the smooth water. The duckling remembered the lovely birds and felt more strangely unhappy than ever. "I will fly to those royal birds," he exclaimed, "and they will kill me, because I am so ugly and dare to approach them. But it does not matter. Better be killed by them than pecked by the ducks, beaten by the hens, pushed about by the maiden who feeds the poultry, or starved with hunger in the winter." Then he flew to the water and swam towards the beautiful swans. The moment they espied the stranger, they rushed to meet him with outstretched wings. "Kill me," said the poor bird, and bent his head down to the surface of the water and awaited death. But what did he see in the clear stream below? His own image, no longer a dark gray bird, ugly and disagreeable to look at, but a graceful and beautiful swan. To be born in a duck's nest in a farmyard is of no consequence to a bird if it is hatched from a swan's egg. He now felt glad at having suffered sorrow and trouble, because it enabled him to enjoy so much better all the pleasure and happiness around him. For the great swans swam round the newcomer and stroked his neck with their beaks as a welcome. Into the garden presently came some little children and threw bread and cake into the water. "See," cried the youngest, "there is a new one." And the rest were delighted and ran to their father and mother, dancing and clapping their hands and shouting joyously, "There is another swan come, a new one has arrived." Then they threw more bread and cake into the water and said, "The new one is the most beautiful of all. He is so young and pretty." And the old swans bowed their heads before him. Then he felt quite ashamed and hid his head under his wing, for he did not know what to do. He was so happy, and yet not at all proud. He had been persecuted and despised for his ugliness, and now he heard them say he was the most beautiful of all the birds. Even the elder tree bent down its boughs into the water before him, and the sun shone warm and bright. Then he rustled his feathers, curved his slender neck, and cried joyfully from the depths of his heart, "I never dreamed of such happiness as this while I was an ugly duckling." That story's a little bit longer, but it's a good one. So who was in the story? The mother duck, the beginning, his brothers, the queen duck, the ugly duckling, the wild ducks, the woman with a cat and a hen, the peasant, and the swans. If you're using the Circe Guide to Reading, these would all be highlighted in pink in your story, so they'd be easy to go back and find. What did these people do? These characters, like people. The mother duck, she sat on the eggs. She said the ugly duckling was a great swimmer. Then she told the ugly duckling she wished he'd never been born. His brothers bit him, pushed him, ridiculed him, said they wished the cat would get him. Queen duck told the mother to do something to improve him. The ugly duckling, he ran away from home. He joined the wild ducks. He hid from the shooters. He stayed with the old woman. He ran away from her. Then he left the farmer's or peasant's house, and he asked the swans to kill him. The wild ducks, what did they do? They invited the ugly duckling to join them. And the geese did too. I forgot the geese. The woman with the cat and hen, she took in the duckling on a 3-week trial. The peasant saved the duckling from the ice and took him home to his family. The swans welcomed the duckling. So we're going to choose one, and I chose his brothers and the action I chose was ridiculing him. Going back to his original family. So we wonder, should the ugly duckling's brothers have ridiculed him? And then we convert the should question to an issue, whether the brothers should have ridiculed the ugly duckling. And then here's the ante. The issues at the top, Whether the brothers should have ridiculed the ugly duckling, affirmative, negative, interesting. Again, why they did, maybe not why they should have. The brothers felt like it. Everyone else was doing it, maybe influenced by the other animals in the farmyard. Other animals pecked the ugly duckling. The turkey attacked the ugly duckling. Even the duckling's own mother was against him. Children followed the lead of their parents. So these are what these brothers are all seeing others do. They probably influenced them. The royal duck said the wished mother would improve him a little. And the mother said their father was unkind. But why should the brothers not have ridiculed him? They hurt their brother's feelings. They hurt their brother physically. The duckling was so sad. He was miserable. He ended up with no shelter. He almost froze. He was to death. He was painfully lonely. And his family should have helped him, even if no one else did. They were in the center of a beautiful place. Their actions don't match their surroundings. See how we start with the obvious and we actually get a little more, the more we think about this, the longer the list gets, probably the better ideas get. But I mean, the obvious ones are good too. I mean, those top two in the negative are some of the best. So the interesting column, swans are bigger than ducks. The father duck never visited. So these are just other things that we know about the story or the characters in the story. The duck family was on a farm with a lot of other animals. All the animals mistreated the duckling. The girl who fed the poultry kicked the ugly duckling. It took 2 years for the ugly duckling to be an adult size. And so I read a little about swans. Swans take 3 or 4 years to mature. Swans and ducks can live in the same climate. It was lovely summer weather in the country. That's when he was born. And their farmhouse where he was born was in a sunny spot by a deep river. So these are some other things we know about the story. Okay, now we have a second Annie that is finished. So let's see what's next. Let's compare the two types or the two examples. And we conclude both times we read a story, we wrote a character list and then an actions to go with it. We chose one character action pair. We asked a should question about the pair, and then we converted the question to an issue. And the issue takes the form whether X should have done Y. Both our issues were in that structure, that grammatical structure. Then both times when we had an issue, we created and we filled an Annie chart to hold our ideas. We listed affirmatives and negatives, plus interesting information that doesn't seem to matter yet. Maybe it will. And we also note that we chose a concrete action. And then sometimes I said this before, we list not why he should have done something, but why he did do something. Those are all affirmatives that cause the action. So just as a note for issues for the rest of your Lost Tools adventures, the other things we noticed. These are some other things that happened. The emperor's advisor got scared. The ugly duckling froze into the ice. But we don't write things like that in our character action list because they were not volitional actions. They were not done on purpose. We want to practice decision making. That's the point of these essays. And so we think about actions that people chose to do. So we don't write an issue whether he should have frozen into the ice or whether the advisor should have been afraid of being discovered. Those are things that happened. They can go into the Annie, but they're not things to write an issue, to use in an issue. And then another note, we're deciding what we think about the actions. So we include everything we know about the action now. We're not limited to what an actor knew at the time. We're not limited with the ugly ducklings brothers to say that we know only what the brothers knew, that they had, that the farmyard didn't like the brother and he left. That's all they knew. So we're asking what we think. We can make reasonable inferences. I have some things in the Annie about parades and brothers. Or I might when it gets longer, but we're not adding Martians to the story. So we make reasonable inferences. So it's okay to put things that weren't directly stated in the story, like how fine silk is, how rare and how expensive. That was one of the things that the weavers asked for. And so we're getting to know their character a little bit because we know something about silk. And maybe when we know something about brothers that might not have been explained in the story, but we can add those to the Annie. Those are reasonable inferences. So here's a couple more things about Annies. The dirt goes into the Annie bucket along with the gold. You notice we had some things that didn't matter much. But sometimes we have to take the dirt off the wall and put it into the hopper, the bucket of the Annie, because the dirt blocks our vision. And then if we get rid of the dirt, then we see the gold that was behind it. So dirt can lead us to the gold. Sometimes it just distracts us. We don't know what to do with an idea, so we just drop it in the I column and get out of the way and move on. So when we fill an Annie, we want to never stop thinking. Just drop what doesn't fit, affirmative, negative, drop it into the I column and move on. Just keep going. So when you start to get stuck, you just put it in the I column and move on. And if you get really stuck and you don't know where to put anything, just write everything in the I column. Every idea could go into the I column. And then later we can go back and look at all those items and move them into affirmative or move them into negative after we've filled the columns and understand the story better and see what it means. Then we can move things over. And just note, we are not making any decisions yet about this information. This is just, like we say at work, it's just invention. We can say anything we want. We're not deciding what's a good idea and what's a bad idea. We're not judging anything. We're not rating our answers. A lot of times if a student cannot fill an Annie, it's because he says this idea is not good enough to go in. But if he puts those in there too, he'll fill an Annie. And note about issues too. I get asked this a lot in forums and Q&A sessions and workshops. Here are just some notes. If we let a student choose his own issue, he's more interested in working on it. If we work with him if we check his character action list and let him choose his own character action pair, he's choosing something he wants to think about. We often choose things that are analogous to our real lives. And so a student will, so he's not asking about himself, about something where he has a personal stake in the outcome of the issue. We do not use issues like that, because if I write about whether I should have pizza on Friday night, I don't learn the thinking skills. Excuse me. I get swayed by my own emotions and my own desires. And so that's not a good thing to practice on. It's like letting somebody practice on real wood when they're not sure how to hold a saw yet. So we want to use scrap wood. We want to use stories where it doesn't matter. You know, if the duck freezes in the ice, that's very sad. But it's in the book and we're not going to, lose sleep at night over that. So that's where we learn clear thinking skills. So we want issues from literature, but any issue is fine. We could have chosen whether the goose should have said he was ugly, but come with us anyway, if we want to think about that. Or we could ask whether the turkey cock should have thought he was emperor. Or we can ask, oh, that's thinking though. We really want something concrete. You've probably read the rest of the slide by now. One actor, one action. Fairy tales don't often name characters. We don't even know the mother's name. And we don't know the brothers' names. If they had been treated separately, if they were called Huey, Dewey, and Louie, we would have chosen one of them. Like in the Three Little Pigs, we wouldn't ask whether the little pigs should do something. We should ask whether the first little pig should have done something, or whether the third little pig should have done something. We separate those when we know their names. So we have just one actor. But April Langen, with words of wisdom about lost tools, says, if the brothers are mentioned as a group, she's kind of a fairy tale specialist. If the brothers are mentioned as a group, like in this story, they act as a group, none are distinct, then for her students, she said she permits using a group as a character, because normally we don't use groups as characters. And then the action too, I chose the action ridiculed. So you could I can put my finger on a moment in the story that the action occurred, then using a less concrete action can work. But usually we want something very concrete. So if we ask whether the second little pig should have trusted the third little pig, we want something very concrete. How did he show his trust? What was the concrete action in which he demonstrated his trust? When was it embodied so that somebody could see it if they're watching the pig? Well, he ran to his brother's brick house to hide. So that embodies his trust. And so we say if we're asking something like, should the children trust the ice cream man? That's what we really want is, should Billy have bought the orange push-up? sherbet from the ice cream man. So we want to get concrete like that with the issues. All right. So to practice this lesson for you as teachers, these videos are directed toward the teachers. You can let your children listen to the stories. Maybe I won't read them again. That's it for the whole 21 videos, or however much they are, however many there are. But these videos are for you, the teacher, to use so that you can understand the lessons to be able to teach them. So when you teach this lesson, you'll ask your students, you start your class by asking your students about something about the lesson. Like today, have you ever made a decision? Or maybe it's an analogy. We'll do one of those pretty soon. Then to make sure they're ready to learn the lesson. So if they've made a decision before, they're ready to learn about an Annie. There's one lesson about sorting your ideas later on. If they've ever cleaned their rooms, then they're ready for the lesson. If they can explain to you how they organize things in the bedroom or in the kitchen when they unload the dishwasher, maybe, then they can learn to sort their ideas. You'll have to teach them, you'll have to guide them through it, but we want to make sure they're ready to learn, that they know the prerequisites. So for example, if you're teaching parallelism and they don't know the parts of speech, then you have to teach a different lesson than you planned. You have to teach parts of speech. So this is the part of you want your students to talk to you, and you need to listen to them and see how much they know so that you know how to adjust your lesson for the day. In the classroom or with our children, we're doing constant informal assessment every minute. Should he do this? Should he not? Should he know it? We're asking these questions all the time. So if you know your students are ready for the lesson, we show them at least 2 examples of it. And then we ask them to compare them to see maybe you ask what came first, what came second. And then if they can start to say, this is like that, that's like that, these are how they're the same, then at some point they'll say, oh, I get it. And then they can tell you the whole thing. Sometimes it's a process, like today. Sometimes it's an idea. Do you know what a simile is? But whatever it is, then you want to ask them to practice the process and see if they're practicing correctly. And you may have to adjust as needed. You'll be telling them things like, oh, this column only has 9, you need 1 more. And things like that to help them practice this whole lesson to do just what you've given them examples of. And then you tell them, good job. All right. We'll talk about assessment. This first lesson is super long. None of the others will be probably more than about 10 minutes, except for 1 or 2 that are extra long and not normal. But I just want to say something about assessment from the very beginning. We assess writing. We assess this homework the way we would assess a piano practice. We are coaching skills. We don't give feedback about the quality of their work. They may not have control over the quality. If they're learning how to play trumpet, you can say, hold your mouth like this, or close your door, or whatever you want to say. But they don't really they're not good enough yet to control the quality they produce or to assess the quality for themselves. And so we don't assess them on the quality of their product. We're saying, like in tennis, bend your knees, watch the ball. I asked for 15, you gave me 20. I asked for 20, you gave me 15, so give me 5 more. And after that, you say, you did what I asked, good, finished. And that's how we assess writing. We're not going to say, like in a piano lesson, it would be kind of silly if somebody said at the end of the lesson, the end of 30-minute lesson, 87, see you next week. We have to assess the actions. And then here's one of my favorite analogies. Writing students are like toddlers, but they're not learning to fall down. They're learning to walk. My friend said, my grandson is learning to fall down. And it looks like that. And it looks like they're not writing well, and you may despair that they ever will. But like the ugly duckling needed, give them time to grow and improve and let them do their own work. If we keep telling them what to think and what to choose and what to write, they can't develop their own judgment. And that's the complete opposite of what this course is trying to do. But this is a safe place to make bad decisions. But students don't. They know what the right thing is. The truth of God is written in their hearts, and they say, this is what I don't think I've had one time where I think I didn't understand a student, but I've assessed about 1,000 essays, and I've never seen a child explain why somebody should do the wrong thing. So we want to let them do it. You've been we want to let them think for themselves and see why they think what they think and why you think what you think, why right is right. So they just need experience. So let them practice and just keep making sure they do the whole practice. If you say 45 minutes a day, then it can't be 40. It has to be 45. And that's the assessment that you're giving them. They need to know, they need to be able to act on what you tell them. If you say you didn't put a period here, they can act on that. That's good. Okay, next. And then after your students complete these exercises, they are ready for arrangement. And the slide is wrong, and I'm not going to record the past 45 minutes again to fix it. I'm sorry. After your students complete these exercises in Invention, they'll be ready for arrangement. Arrangement is lesson 2. Always Invention, then arrangement, then elocution. And here are the links. There's not an IO group link. Oh, they're not links. Okay, they're just places to go. So IO groups, if you search online, if you just type in IO groups, it'll take you to the website that says, here are all the groups you may choose from. And then you choose LTW Mentor. And then Facebook, if you're on Facebook, you know how that works. The group is called Lost Tools of Writing Mentor. And we have a YouTube channel. If you search Circe's Lost Tools of Writing channel, it's called The Three Amigos. I think it says that on every slide. And there are terrible pictures of us. And so you'll know that's who it is. We look terrible, so you know it's us. And those you can check, like one is about sorting, one is about prerequisites, one is about just all kinds of things, definition maybe, or issues. And so if you want to hear more about something, that's a good place to do it. We also have a free webinar once a month, the third Thursday at 3, so that I remember to show up. It's 3 Eastern time, so the third Thursday of every month. And 3 p.m. Eastern, so that's 1 p.m. Mountain Time and noon Pacific. You just pop in. You can ask a question and leave, or you just sit there for an hour and listen to everybody else's questions and answers. And so there's no charge, but you have to register through the website. So that's what it is. And if you would like to attend a writing workshop, a 6-hour workshop on probably a Saturday, but whenever, if you'd like to host one, you're welcome to do that. We have people all over the country. And we've done some in Europe, some of these things in Europe too. And we're setting up to do them on other continents as well. So you can find a workshop to attend or to host if you were interested in a writing workshop. I think that's it. Thanks for joining us. I promise nothing else will be this long. And we'll see you next time. Now that we've finished Invention, the next session will be arrangement. Thank you.